We are shaping the Philippines into a future-ready maritime hub that can meet the evolving demands of global trade. So together, let us shape a bagong Pilipinas that champions economic growth, industrial self-reliance, and national security, and continue to proudly showcase Filipino excellence to the rest of the world.
30 years ago, Balamban was barely a dot on the map. It was a quiet coastal town on the western edge of Cebu Island in the Philippines. Fishermen, coconut trees, and not much else. Today, giant ocean-going vessels are built there. Massive cargo ships, bulk carriers, and tankers slide off slipways into the water and sail away to the Atlantic, the Pacific, and every ocean in between. Almost 400 ships have been built in Balamban and delivered to ports across the world. All of them built by Filipino hands. That transformation didn't happen by accident. It happened because Japan came to the Philippines with money, technology, and a vision. And now, President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. is betting that what started as a Japanese investment project can become a permanent pillar of Philippine power, economically and strategically. The big question is, will it last this time?
What is made in the Philippines can stand shoulder to shoulder with the best of anywhere in the world. It places the Philippines firmly on the map as a future-ready maritime manufacturing hub.
On June 3, 2026, President Marcos signed Proclamation 1288. The order added 64.7 hectares of land to the West Cebu Industrial Park Special Economic Zone, known as the WCIP, in Balamban, Cebu. It was the third time Marcos had expanded this particular piece of real estate. The first expansion came before this one, then another in October 2024. Now this. The WCIP is now more than 600 hectares in total. That is roughly the size of 840 football fields. And inside this industrial zone, one company runs the show, Tsuneshi Heavy Industries Inc., a Japanese shipbuilding giant that has been operating in Balamban since the mid-1990s. Tsuneshi is a joint venture between Japan's Tsuneshi Holdings and the Philippines' own Aboitiz Group, one of the country's most powerful conglomerates. Sabin Aboitiz, president and CEO of the Aboitiz Group, said something at a ceremony earlier this year that stuck. All built by Filipino hands and sailed by Filipinos throughout the world's oceans.
Our first dual bunker and methanol vessel made here in Balamban, Cebu. So it's a big deal. We made about 400 vessels when we started, all made by Filipino hands and sailed by Filipino sailors around the world, right?
He was not just being patriotic. He was describing a genuine reality, supported the construction of nearly 400 ships, most of them delivered to international buyers. The proclamation did not come out of nowhere. It came right after Marcos returned from a state visit to Japan, a 4-day trip to Tokyo that produced agreements worth a staggering 56.3 billion Philippine pesos in investments. Shipbuilding was the centerpiece. On May 28, 2026, Marcos sat down in Tokyo with Hitoshi Kono, the chairman and CEO of Tsuneshi Group Corporation. Trade Secretary Christina Roque was also in the room. Kono laid out Tsuneshi's plans to expand and modernize its Balamban shipyard. The proposal included a new dry dock, new production buildings, and infrastructure upgrades designed to significantly increase production capacity. But the meeting wasn't just about construction plans. It was also about the future of green shipping. Tsuneshi told Marcos they plan to push ahead with next generation, environmentally sustainable shipbuilding, the kind of vessels that will define the global maritime industry for the next several decades. Tsuneshi's operations in Cebu have helped transform Balamban into one of the country's leading shipbuilding and industrial hubs, creating thousands of jobs and opportunities for Filipino workers and local communities. Trade Secretary Christina Roque, May 2026 Secretary Roque, underscored that the Philippines doesn't just see Tsuneshi as an investor. The government sees them as a long-term partner in building the country's maritime manufacturing ecosystem.
Tsuneshi Group Corporation, which is into shipbuilding. Sa Cebu naman po ito. This is together with the Aboitiz Group. And they have also pledged an investment of 10 billion pesos. So we are just waiting for approval, PRA, and then after that, this should be ready to go. So we need to continue to build ships here in the Philippines, and we are hoping to be the top 4 in the world sa shipbuilding. So again, another confidence in the Philippines, these Japanese companies.
That language matters. It signals that Manila wants this relationship to be structural, built into the economy, not just a lease arrangement that can be canceled when the business climate shifts. If you want to understand where the Philippines is headed in shipbuilding, look at one specific vessel. Its hull number was SC-443. Its name, when it was finally delivered to the world, was the Brave Pioneer. On January 15, 2026, President Marcos himself stood at the Tsuneshi shipyard in Balamban to preside over the naming and delivery ceremony of the Brave Pioneer. It was the Philippines' first methanol dual-fueled bulk carrier. In fact, it was among the first vessels of its kind anywhere on Earth. The ship is a Comsar-Max bulk carrier, meaning it is large enough to transit the port of Comsar in Guinea, West Africa, through the Atlantic. At 81,200 deadweight tons, it is a commercial giant. But what makes it remarkable is not its size. It is its fuel system. The Brave Pioneer runs on methanol, a low-carbon alternative to conventional marine fuel. Compared to a standard vessel, it cuts carbon dioxide emissions by 10%, nitrogen oxide emissions by 80%, and sulfur oxide emissions by 99%. That is not a marginal improvement. That is a different category of ship entirely. And it was assembled in the Philippines by Filipino workers in Balamban, Cebu, the same quiet coastal town that barely existed on international maps 30 years ago. Here is the headline that every Philippine government official loves to repeat. The Philippines is the 4th largest shipbuilding nation on Earth, behind only China, South Korea, and Japan. That claim is real. The OECD confirmed it in a peer review published in September 2025. In 2022, the Philippines held that ranking based on global output. But the same OECD report tells a more complicated story, one that the government brochures tend to leave out. Philippine shipbuilding peaked somewhere between 2014 and 2015. After that, output fell sharply. In 2018, the country was producing 873,000 compensated gross tons of ships per year. By 2019, that number had collapsed to 406,000. A decline of more than 53% in a single year. What happened? One shipyard destroyed everything. Hanjin Heavy Industries, a South Korean giant that had built a massive facility at Subic Bay, went bankrupt in 2019 in what became the largest corporate bankruptcy in Philippine history. When Hanjin shut down, it took a huge chunk of the country's production capacity with it. The OECD noted that the industry's dependence on large foreign-owned facilities made the collapse catastrophic. That lesson still hangs over every conversation about Philippine shipbuilding today. Between 2000 and 2024, 99% of all ships produced for export in the Philippines were built by foreign-owned shipyards. The country's domestic shipbuilders are focused almost entirely on repair and small local work. The export economy of Philippine shipbuilding is essentially a foreign operation happening on Philippine soil. After Hanjin's collapse, the Subic Bay shipyard sat idle. Then came a bidding war, and according to USNI News, it was not just commercial companies that were interested. Chinese investors reportedly wanted the yard. They did not get it. American investment firm Cerberus Capital Management took control. In September 2025, the revived yard, now operating as the Aguila Subic shipyard under South Korea's HD Hyundai, launched commercial vessel operations. The Philippine Navy leases part of the facility for repairs. U.S. defense firms have set up presence in the surrounding area. A separate munitions plant has been approved nearby. U.S. Ambassador Mary Kay Carlson celebrated the moment publicly. Shipbuilding is back at the Aguila Subic shipyard. The symbolism was unmistakable. Subic Bay, formerly a massive U.S. military base, then abandoned, then threatened by Chinese investment, is now back in the Allied orbit, producing ships, hosting the Philippine Navy, and sitting strategically close to the South China Sea. Strategic location matters here. Subic Bay is 90 kilometers from Manila and positioned near the resource-rich waters where China and the Philippines have been clashing for years. Building serious shipyard infrastructure there is not just an economic decision, it is a security one. You cannot talk about Philippine maritime infrastructure without talking about China. In August 2025, a Philippine Coast Guard vessel, BRP Suluan, was conducting a routine patrol near Scarborough Shoal when Chinese Coast Guard and People's Liberation Army Navy ships maneuvered aggressively to expel it from the area. The incident was captured on video and released by Manila. It was one of many such confrontations that have occurred with increasing regularity since 2023. China's shipbuilding capacity is not a background detail in this story. It is the defining fact. A 2025 U.S. Congressional Research Service report stated that China's shipbuilding capacity is 230 times that of the United States. China, South Korea, and Japan together account for 95% of the global order book. If conflict ever erupts in the South China Sea, the Philippines would be facing a naval power that can build and replace warships at a rate no other country can match. This is why analysts say that the Philippines' shipbuilding ambitions are not just about jobs and exports. They are about whether the Philippines can ever develop a maritime industrial base that supports its own defense. A report from CSIS, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, put it directly, developing a domestic industrial base to support a modern fleet is essential to its sustainability. It also addresses supply chain resiliency requirements. In other words, if you cannot repair, maintain, and eventually build your own naval vessels, you are permanently dependent on foreign goodwill for your own security. The Philippine government has a plan. It is called the Maritime Industry Development Plan, or MIDP, covering the years 2019 to 2028. The plan was adopted under Executive Order 55 in 2024 and sets out a vision to make the Philippines a nationally integrated and globally competitive maritime industry by 2028. There are programs for workforce training, green technology, infrastructure upgrades, and financial support through state-owned banks. The Development Bank of the Philippines has a PHP 50 billion loan facility specifically earmarked for MIDP-aligned shipbuilding projects. The bank covers up to 70% of project costs and offers long-term loans at competitive rates. As of December 2024, 37 projects had already been financed under this scheme. A new Shipbuilding and Ship Repair Development Bill of 2025 is also working through the legislative process. If passed, it would give the sector formal recognition as a strategic economic driver, with tax exemptions, incentives for green technology investment, and structured support for workforce training. That all sounds solid. But analysts point to structural gaps that policy documents do not fully solve. Philippine shipyards still depend overwhelmingly on foreign companies for actual production. Local supply chains are thin, infrastructure in many yards is aging, and the country is competing against China, South Korea, and Japan, three nations that have spent decades building national champions in shipbuilding, backed by state subsidies and massive capital investment that the Philippines simply cannot match. The OECD peer review was direct about this. The Philippines faces limited fiscal space and higher borrowing costs that make it difficult to compete at the scale of the established powers. Here is the central tension that defines Philippine shipbuilding today. The industry produces impressive numbers, more than 14,000 workers, nearly 400 ships delivered, fourth in the world, a methanol-powered vessel that made global headlines, a 600-hectare special economic zone anchored by Japanese capital and technology. But 99% of the export production is done by foreign companies. The moment a major foreign investor, like Hanjin in 2019, decides to leave, the numbers collapse. The country's ranking can fall off a cliff almost overnight. The workers lose their jobs, the export revenue vanishes, and the Philippine state is left trying to pick up the pieces. The question that analysts keep asking is this: when Tsunashi eventually decides to expand somewhere else, or restructure its global operations, what remains? Does the Philippines have a generation of Filipino engineers, Filipino managers, and Filipino entrepreneurs who have absorbed the knowledge and built their own capacity? Or does it just have an empty dock and a fond memory? There are reasons for cautious optimism. Tsunashi established the Lapu-Lapu Cebu International College in 2021, specifically to train Filipino talent for the maritime industry. Over 12,000 Filipinos currently work in Balamban with skills that did not exist in this country 3 decades ago. The Aboitiz Group, a Filipino conglomerate, is a genuine partner in the venture, not just a landlord. These are signs of knowledge transfer that the Hanjin era never produced. And President Marcos is clearly treating shipbuilding as a strategic priority, not just an economic talking point. 3 expansions of the WCIP, a trip to Japan specifically to meet Tsunei's chairman, a state-level push to lock in green shipbuilding technology before the global market standardizes around it. These are not the moves of a government treating foreign investment as passive income. Balamban, Cebu is a window into the larger story of what the Philippines is trying to become. It is a country of over 7,600 islands, surrounded by strategic waterways, positioned at the intersection of the world's busiest shipping lanes, and increasingly pressed by a rising China that contests its maritime territory in the South China Sea. The ships that leave Balamban today carry grain and ore across the Atlantic. Tomorrow, the government hopes some of those ships will also carry the weight of Philippine sovereignty in contested waters. That requires not just more ships, it requires the ability to build them, maintain them, and eventually design them on Philippine soil, with Philippine expertise. Whether the Marcos administration's shipbuilding push delivers lasting capacity or remains a leased industry dressed up in national pride, that is the question that will define the country's maritime future for a generation. The brave pioneer has already sailed. The next question is whether the Philippines is truly ready to follow.